Hey, good morning, Saad.
Hey, good morning. How are you doing?
All right.
Cool. We'll get started in a few. Let folks trickle in.
I think we'll have many people today. I don't think there's any topics other than my leftover topic from last month.
Yeah, that may be the case. If we don't end up with enough people, we can cancel this one and then push this topic one more time. I think a lot of the excitement has died down since we cut the release.
So the release went okay.
Yep. Now it's in the process of being integrated.
Okay.
Let's give it a couple more minutes. All right, I think we've got enough people. Let's go ahead and get started. So the only thing on the agenda today is an item from Ben about controller publish unpublished force capability. Ben, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Um, so some of you guys might remember back in December in San Diego, I was proposing a way to solve the problem we have in Kubernetes, which is that if a node goes out of quorum, uh, workloads that are attached to storage can get stuck because uh, you can't safely move the workload to another node without risking that it might still be running on the old node and still be performing IO. And so you end up in the situation where you basically need somebody to manually come in and ensure that the node is either really dead or that the storage is forcibly detached through some out of band mechanism, and then you can safely move the workload to another node. And I would like to automate the solution to this problem. So at the time, I was hoping that we could use controller publish, controller unpublish, and basically have controller unpublish be used to like unpublish the storage from the node that was out of quorum. I later went back and read the spec and realized that the way that the spec is worded is that unpublished doesn't actually require that the node no longer has access to the volume. It just is the reverse of controller publish, which means it puts a controller publish puts a floor on your access. You know, if you ask for write access, you're going to get write access. If you ask for read only, you're going to get at least read only. You might also get write access. You know, there's no ceiling enforcement on like this node must not have this level of access. It's just a floor. So I started thinking about ways to solve this problem, and we at the very least we're going to need some kind of new capability that SPs can advertise that says I know how to put a ceiling on the level of access that a node has, either, you know, to enforce no access when that's desired, or to enforce definitely no write access if you want read access, but you want to enforce that there's no write access. So some sort of capability will be needed to tell the CO that the node is capable of doing that, because the existing spec wording does not imply that nodes are able to do that. And then I guess the question that I came to next was, if we had such a capability, could we just overload the behavior of controller publish and unpublish to say, well, if this capability is present, then the expectation is that basically we would have additional wording on those two RPCs. Like if you have this enforce unpublish, or I don't know what we would call the capability, but then we would have additional wording that says upon unpublish, you must not have access to the volume from this node anymore, or upon controller publish with read only, you must not have write access or something. Or we could just have new RPCs that says, if you have this capability, then there's additional RPCs you can call if you really want to not only do an unpublished, but like a force unpublished, so that after the CO or after the SP returns, it would definitely not have access anymore. And I wanted to sort of get feedback from you guys on how you would feel about such a new capability and new RPCs, so that we could start to build a solution for sort of forcibly detaching storage from nodes in an automated way.
Can you talk a little bit about what the integration on the CO side would look like if such a capability existed?
Yeah. I mean, the idea would be when a determination was made that that a node was unhealthy for whatever reason, and the CO wished to move the pod to another node, and COs can do this however they want. I mean, I think Kubernetes has some timers, and there's actually it's actually there's an eviction timeout that you can. There's an eviction taint that gets put on nodes when they're unhealthy, and pods can decide to tolerate them for short amounts of time or long amounts of time. And I think the default is about 5 minutes. And so the idea is whenever the CO made up its mind that like, okay, I'm going to evict this node and move it, then at that time, if the pod had any attached storage, you would forcibly detach it. And then if the SP said, yep, I have forcibly detached the storage from that node, then the CO could say, okay, whatever state that node is in, I don't know, but I know that it can access the storage. So now it's safe to go schedule the pod somewhere else, attach it to the storage, and go on with life. And then there's a mess to clean up when the node rejoins quorum. You need to not schedule any workloads to the node until it has been fully cleaned up on the node side as well. There's some details to go over there, but I mean that's all Kubernetes implementation stuff. What I wanted to focus on here was the CSI RPC side of it.
I think that seems pretty reasonable. So I think the way I would imagine it is you have a capability that says I'm capable of force detach, whatever we want to call it. And then on the controller unpublish, we have a new Boolean that the CO can optionally set if this capability exists. And by default, we don't use that option. But if some criteria on the CO side have been met, I think I was imagining actually the existing 6-minute timer that we have that we wait for graceful unmelt. Or we could expand that if we wanted to, but we can decide what that is exactly. After that period, we say, okay, we really need to get rid of this attach. So instead of just issuing a regular detach, we're going to issue controller unpublish with this special Boolean if this capability is supported. And then that's an indication to the driver to say, really pull the disk. I know at least EBS has the capability of doing a detach versus a force detach. Not all storage systems do.
Yeah, I imagine there will be some that cannot do this, and for them,
right.
I don't have an answer.
And that's okay. It's just one of those things. Sorry, go ahead.
Not the newer EBS volumes, only not the newer Nitro types, only the older SSDs have this thing, but the newer NVMe, just as a data point, but newer NVMe disk can be pulled even if they were mounted on EBS.
Interesting.
So I want to bring up a point. Way back when we were first deciding like what the specs would look like before we went 1.0, there were a bunch of conversations around force detach. And at the time, we made the decision to not do it because we couldn't think of a safe way to do it to guarantee that there wouldn't be some kind of data loss. Has the world shifted in a way that we're more comfortable now with the fact that there is potentially data loss, or is this? Did I miss part of the use case?
Yeah, the idea. I mean, you were correct that like force detaching means that if there was data that was cached and the cache was not flushed, that you will lose that data. But the idea is you would only use it in a situation where you suspected that the node was already dead. Now, in which case, if the node is dead, you've lost data anyways. Now, there is this funny case where the node is out of quorum, but it's still doing its work. And if you just wait long enough for it to rejoin quorum, you can say, oh, the node, that workload was still running, and I'm glad I never moved it to another node. Whereas this mechanism would cause it to be forcibly killed, and yeah, it would look a lot like the node had died because you pulled the cord, when in fact it hadn't. But it would be no worse than if the node had died. And so the idea is if you're trying to construct your infrastructure to tolerate nodes dying, then this is a problem you have to deal with anyways. And this just basically gets your pods up and running on some other node that much faster.
Well, it's kind of like a half-dead state. right? Because like if a node could be out of quorum, it could still be, but it could still be trying to do some work, hoping that it's going to resync later. And then you're pulling the
Yes.
cord on it. And then if it tries to do a resync after the cord was pulled and it rejoins, like I'm kind of wondering how you're avoiding like a corruption case. It seems like
Oh,
all the
yeah,
stars
yeah.
would have to
So
align perfectly if you're going to avoid some kind of corruption, either at
where
the
it
app
gets where
layer
it
or the
gets
data layer.
yeah, you would need to ensure that you didn't. So once you had pulled the cord forcibly on a node, you would definitely not want to republish that volume to that node until both the node had rejoined quorum and the node had confirmed that it had done all of its detaching on its side. Because you're right, if it's in a half dead state and you yank the cord and then it comes back and it says, oh, I'm healthy again, and then you say, okay, I'm going to move the workload back to that node. If there's like unflushed caches there, they could corrupt you. So you'd have to sort of quarantine the node when it comes back into quorum until it had confirmed that it had done it. So the CSI node plugin would have to do like a node unstage and a node unpublish and all those things and say, yep, I've detached it. There's no data floating around in caches waiting to get flushed. And then you could say, okay, now I will let the node back in and I can start putting workloads on it again. That is sort of the hardest part of all of this, aside from actually having the SP be able to implement force detach, is how you let nodes that you've decided to kill rejoin the cluster.
I think the questions James asking is pretty valid, and maybe the answer here is we should go and flesh the design out on the Kubernetes side. I think the implementation on the CSI side is fairly trivial and non-controversial if we have an agreement on the Kubernetes side of what the conditions are where we would use a force attach or force detach. And
Okay.
I don't think we have consensus there yet.
Yeah, and I would like to prototype this. I
Mhm.
haven't had a lot of time since I proposed this 6 months ago, but
Okay.
I'm happy to propose it. I guess the feedback I was looking for here is like the form that we would like the RPCs to take. So Saad, you mentioned maybe we just reuse the RPCs with like an extra Boolean that defaults to
Yeah.
false. That seems reasonable to me, but I wanted to know
I
what
just
people thought of other alternatives.
yeah. So I just want to add that actually, like in most cloud platforms, a regular detach, a regular detach causes like in most cases, like 95% of the cases, a regular controller unpublished causes the volume to be removed from the node even if volume was mounted. This EBS SSD, the old type, is an exception. But the point I'm trying to get across is this Boolean flag may tell the two things. One is that I think the CU in particularly Kubernetes is not strictly spec compliant on this aspect actually, because after 6-minute timeout, it will unilaterally issue controller unpublish. Like I know the pod is deleted, that there's a conditions there, but the spec says that CU must ensure that controller unpublished and node unstage and node unpublished has successfully completed. But we know that in CO side, Kubernetes does not verify that when it does issue the controller unpublish call.
Oh,
So
you're saying that the spec says do not call controller unpublish until after node unstage and node unpublish?
yeah, the spec
Okay,
says
so yeah, that would be another part of the spec we would have to modify. It said if this capability is present, then you may call controller unpublish before you've called them, and here's what will happen if you do that, and we could spell that out, and then if Kubernetes is already doing that against the wording of the spec, then we could bring it in line with the new wording by taking advantage of this capability.
that was one point, and second was like in most storage systems, I think like and like except that EBS SSD case, but basically most cases like an controller unpublished will force unpublish even if the volume was unmounted, or even if volume was mounted. So yeah, but having a extra flag will obviously tell the storage provider that it's a force unmount. So it's a good to have field.
Okay.
One question, like what the CO should do if the unpublished, like force unpublished failed? Should it retry? Or
Yeah, it would be the same situation you get in today where an unpublished fails, you keep retrying it forever, and as long as it keeps failing, you assume it's still published.
okay.
And so yeah, drivers would have to be, careful about advertising this flag if they can't actually ensure that it's going to succeed. And I worry about situations where the driver implements the flag, but it's only going to work on some volumes and not others. I don't know how realistic that possibility is, but that would be a case where you'd have to communicate what situation you're in with an error code on controller unpublished, where you say, well, some volumes can be unpublished, but not this one. You'd have to communicate that with an error code. But yeah, we'll have to get the error codes. We'll have to think through what error codes are needed to tell the CO whether it should retry or whether it should give up at unpublished time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is good timing. I think on our end, we're looking at revisiting all of this as well, especially now that we're doing a lot of vSphere work. I think vSphere tends to run into this a lot, so we're motivated to solve it.
Is this only for unpublished, or this force flag is also for publish?
Well, the interesting case on the publish side is when someone does a read-only publish, the wording of the spec is vague, and my reading says that it is allowed to be writable even if you only wanted it to be read-only. Read-only seems to be interpreted as a floor. And if you really want to say, yes, I want it to be readable, but definitely not writable, we need a tightening mechanism to say that.
Yeah, I would avoid putting it on the publish side just because at least the way that Kubernetes was initially coded, it would issue controller publishes or attaches regardless of what the detached state of the previous node was. And that was just so that, the loops were trivial to implement. Since then, we've added some additional logic to say, okay, don't do an attach until you have seen the detach succeed if the volume is single writer or advertised as a single writer according to access mode. But it's not a foolproof system, so I would avoid kind of putting that behavior on the attach side. Instead, let's focus on the detach, and that way.
Well, how would we through the spec create a way for COs to publish volumes that are readable but definitely not writable? Because there is a case for that.
Is that orthogonal to the one that we're discussing? Like, that sounds like a separate issue.
It's orthogonal but related. I mean, we don't have to do it, but it's in the vein of putting a ceiling on access. Right now, all of the controller unpublish is about putting a floor on access or removing the floor on access, but there is no ceiling ever. So like, it's perfectly valid to implement a CSI plugin where every node has write access to every volume all the time, and you can pass all the tests that way. But that's not a good thing.
Yeah, but I guess like this is orthogonal to the unpublished discussion, like force and detach discussion we're discussing right now, right?
It touches the same pieces of code in most SPs, which is the access control on the storage controller piece. Basically, right now you're not required to have access control on your storage controller because you can pass all the tests without it. But if you do have access control, you want to be able to say, is it no access, is it read only, or is it read write to this node? And so it's the force detach is the no access mode, ensuring that it's definitely no access, and the read only is sort of the other flavor. It's ensuring it's not writable. Both of them are putting ceilings on your access.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's another issue where we need to figure out how we would surface this on the CO side, at least for Kubernetes. I don't know what that would look like. I know we already have issues with the existing mapping of access modes. So
well,
we need to
the way
clean
it
that up
looks in
at some
Kubernetes
point.
today is if a PV has the read-only flag set to true, then when controller publish is called, it will ask for a read-only publish.
Right.
But in the normal course of things, we never set the read-only flag to true. It only gets set to true if an admin hacks his PV. The sidecar would always creates read-only false PVs. So,
I mean, we could consider mapping access mode such that if your access mode is a read-only once or read-only many, we set the field accordingly.
no, so that's bad because if you have an unclean unmount, you need write access just to do a read-only mount because you have to replay the file system journal.
I see.
Similarly for resizes, even if the volume is going to be read-only, if there's a pending resize, you need the write access to perform the resize before you hand it to the pod. There's a variety of situations where the node should have write access even though the pod should not.
Yeah.
But there's a situations where you don't even want the node to have write access, and those are not covered very well today in Kubernetes.
Does the, like, I know the spec has it and support it and Kubernetes does not cover it. Was that like really needed to have like controller published to be read only? I feel like it's a use case that nobody has and it just exists and nobody's using it as such, and it is causing us all sort of headache.
I think Chris uses it.
They're paranoid users that don't want their volumes to be written to. They want to know for sure that they're going to be read-only so that there's no modifications, especially if you're trying to like share volume among multiple nodes. You don't want to have situations where multiple nodes are trying to replay the journal in parallel or doing other weird things like that.
But that
Yeah,
was
I think Chris's argument was similar. He was saying he didn't want, if a malicious actor broke out of a pod onto the node, to have write access to the volume.
I think he was enforcing a different way. So there's no way external provisioner right now provisions read-only PVs actually. So I don't know how he's doing it, but yeah.
You can make your own PVs. That's how you do it.
Yeah, but his one uses dynamic provisioning, that we know for sure. So yeah.
Well, you could also just modify the sidecar, which I've done in the past, to create read-only PVs if the SP wants it to.
Yeah, but I'm just worried about the case where like you have case where volume, you have the metadata could not be fixed, the journals could not be replayed because because volume could not be mounted as read write, and it's basically unusable on the node.
Right. That can happen today if you have a read-only volume. It can be unmountable. So yeah, I think that the default should be, yeah, of course the nodes have write access even if the pods don't, but we got to think about these edge cases where you really don't even want the node to have write access. I don't know that is definitely a lower priority concern, but I pulled it in because it's related to the same pieces of code in the SP. And it would be good to get both sort of written down at the same time in terms of how the spec treats them, even if we don't actually use the read-only one all that much. So I kind of have the answers to my questions. I'm gonna My plan is to basically propose a patch to the spec that will introduce a new capability and changes to these RPCs and changes to the wording around the RPCs if the capability is enabled. And then also to prototype something on the Kubernetes side that demonstrates that this is a workable scheme.
So one last thing, Ben, like even if we implement these things, like until we solve the whole like issue of like pods, we won't issue like detach at all until the pod is deleted. So until we solve that issue in Kubernetes, this will not be used, right? And that's the
Yeah.
harder
So
problem.
the prototype on the Kubernetes side would be new code that did that. It would more aggressively delete pods if it detected that they had no, or that the storage that they were using was attached to a CSI plugin that had this force detach capability, and it could successfully use that. And I'm sure that there's dragons there that I'm not aware of yet, but I want to just start implementing it and find those dragons and then deal with them.
I think the go forward plan makes sense. I think the CSI side is going to be more or less trivial. It'll be the Kubernetes side that'll be much more challenging to figure out. So let's start with the Kubernetes side, and once we get a consensus there, I think we can move this forward on the CSI side pretty easily.
Okay.
Okay,
So
anything else on this topic?
Not on that topic, no.
So anything else folks want to talk about in terms of CSI spec? I don't see anything else on the agenda.
Oh, actually, I added one item last minute.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, so I just want to give a quick update about the volume expansion changes that we agreed previously. I sent out an email. I think it did not make out to the announce list, but we made a change to the node expand volume. The sanity tests are there now, and they verify the node expand volume should be called after node published. So we enforce that if anybody is using the latest version of sanity test. So this, we could wait for some input. We could wait for some time, and the next call we can discuss how we are going to make changes to the node expand volume to to tighten the wording that says node expand volume could be called before or after node publish. And yeah.
So it was Xing that was most worried about this potential change, right?
Yes.
I thought we are going to run the sanity test first before we make this change.
Right. Well, that was going to be my next question. Is it sounds like we
Right.
have the sanity tests, so now it's on you guys to run them and
Right.
tell us.
Have not
turns
run it
out.
yet, but yeah. So we'll run them, but just it's not done yet.
So they're merged.
No.
Hemant?
Yeah.
No.
I'm saying that the new tests are merged.
Yes.
So I see that you sent out an email basically asking folks to run this, right?
Yeah.
Maybe give some time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity to inform everyone that that was done. And yeah, so
Cool. Thanks, Samantha. And can you put a link in the agenda doc just for folks who may not have attended and they're just looking at the notes?
okay, sure.
Cool. Thank you. Anything else on the volume resize stuff?
Not at the moment, but I think like we have to, like for 1.4.0, we have to start planning about the two changes that that are pending. Yeah, the node expand volume, this wording change, and the deprecating the plugin capabilities. So
okay. Do you want to put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
Yes, yeah, I'll do
Perfect.
that.
Do you want to put like a time? Maybe even in that email, you can give a time, say by what time you hope people finish this, and then you're going to go ahead and propose this change, then because otherwise, there's no deadline, then you probably won't get any answer.
Okay, so
Mm,
the wording will be changed when 1.4.0 is cut, I think.
okay, so 1.4. So when could that be?
I think it would be 1.20 Kubernetes timeframe sometime.
Okay.
So I don't have, sorry.
I was going to suggest maybe let's put together in a Google Doc a alert that we want to send out to the CSI announce group that basically documents what the plan is and what the deadlines are. And then once we have agreement on that, we can send that out to CSI announce, and that serves as the warning for everyone.
Okay. Okay. I'll do that offline, the Google Doc. Just, yeah. I didn't have anything else for the expansion.
Okay, sounds good. Was there anything else anybody was hoping to talk about? All right, then we'll get 25 minutes back in your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.